I believe before talking about governance, there is a concept that's very important to have well understood, and this is the idea of identity. Probably there is a lot of ways to define identity, but what I'm talking here is everything that makes you you. And that's like the accumulation of all your life experiences, your history, your interactions, your events. That's what makes you who you are, right? At the very least, this is the case in the analog world. We can take that and translate it to the digital world. The equivalent of that will be all your online or offline experiences, all the data you ever created, all your posts, all your pictures, all the data that these companies have tracked about you. That will be your digital representation, right? There's a problem here, which is that all this data is on these little boxes, the Google box, the Facebook box, but it's like very big, and then like there's thousands of other companies that have little pieces of data of you, and a lot of companies that you don't know that they exist. And then you have your mobile phone. This is your mobile phone, and you have your laptop. That's a laptop. All this data is what conforms your identity. The problem is it doesn't even make sense to talk about it because you cannot use this data. It's encapsulated on each of these databases or devices, right? So this doesn't talk well with these, and this doesn't talk well with these, or these, or these. And on top of that, you cannot trust this data. Like, why should I trust what Facebook say? They have the capacity to change whatever they want. This data is not signed. At the current stage, it doesn't really make sense to talk about digital identity because it's not that we can make use of it. For example, if I ask you what's your digital identity, a lot of people will point me to their Facebook profile. Right? What kind of identity is that if they can just at any given time completely change this data, or can be gone, or you don't have any control? That cannot be an identity. I guess the next stage of identity will be from analog to digital, and now we're going to decentralize. And that's a decentralized identity. This is a concept that has existed for some time, but with the appearance of blockchain, it kind of have like a new dimension. And so now, instead of having these tiny little boxes, we just have like one huge box. Sorry about the noise. Here we could be more specific and talk, for example, about the Ethereum blockchain. Blockchains are cool in a lot of senses and not that cool in some others. They're permissionless. That means anyone can read or write here, but they're expensive. So the data we can put here, it needs to be limited. You cannot put your pictures, for example. The cool thing though is, for example, that any data that you put in the blockchain is digitally signed. That means that you can cryptographically prove that a specific address put this data in there. Now we have kind of identity for free. This is your public Ethereum address. And because only you have the private key, no one else will be able to change that. We have this address, which is a very long number, and it's associated to me. This is my digital representation. And now I can take that and I can start like putting all sorts of associations of this address. For example, I can say that I like cats, and so I write that in the blockchain, and everyone know that I said that I like cats. But you could use it for any sort of a statement. You can have like this external entity. This represents an organization that's from organization, and it says like, hey, Xavi belongs to this organization, and they can write that. Cool thing is, because this is done using an Ethereum transaction, this is signed by this entity, or it can be signed depending on the kind of data you're putting there. So, for example, you could have your nation state that has already some Ethereum address and can come and say Xavi is over 18 years old, and this will be also digitally signed by the nation state. Or they can say that you have a driving license, or Greenpeace is giving away tokens for the people that make contributions to the climate change. Maybe they're giving me like 10 Greenpeace tokens, right? And only Greenpeace can have given me this. While this is kind of your digital identity, this is probably a very bad representation of who you are. But it's a very good representation of the data that's objective, that needs a global consensus. while this won't work for your social networks, maybe it can, I don't know. It can be very, very useful for other stuff. We can get a little more fancy here, and instead of just being represented by an address and having all these associations, what we can do is we can have a smart contract. I'll represent this smart contract as a box. And this box still has an address. And now it's my representation. This allows us to do a couple stuff. One is we can put logic inside here. So we can add, for example, accessibility layers. Maybe there's some operations that this identity is doing somewhere else, but now can be automatized because you gave access to certain addresses. Or maybe you can have like a key recovery in case you lose like all your addresses. You can have systems of friends and stuff that can give you back the access to your identity. Another interesting stuff is now anything can have an identity. You can have an identity that represents any entity, like as we said, maybe like it's an organization. Maybe this Greenpeace has its own identity. Maybe a nation state has its own identity. Or maybe it's an autonomous organization, a DAO, with its own behavior and logic. Or a wash machine, it doesn't matter. Like anything can have their own little list of claims and statements, and everything can talk with everything. Those are just a couple examples of how identities can be done in the blockchain, and there is a lot of different proposals out there. The good thing is they're kind of all compatible because we have this common playground. Although if we use like a common interface, it makes things much, much easier. And how it's gonna be or how it's gonna look like, it's I think like an open debate, but it will look something like this.